Good evening. Welcome to Act and React. I'm Edward Gibbons Brown. Thank you for joining us for our very first episode. Our goal is to explore the ways theater can spark conversation about important topics. Each episode will start with a monologue, followed by a conversation in which the performer and I will discuss topics raised by the performance. Tonight we're joined by Brian C. Petty. Brian is a local playwright and actor, and he wrote tonight's monologue. He's playing Jack, a World War II veteran who works as a bartender and struggles with a drinking problem. One night, another veteran walks into the bar. Here's Brian Petty as Jack.
"3 years. On the road to redemption at age 49. After all those years of, not looking at myself in the mirror. Oh. You get no respect for such a thing in a bar. No. It's a desperate corner. And all they want is more like themselves, but I'm going to be stronger or whatever. I don't do that stuff no more. I got a family I got to work up to, you see. And the guy's trying to buy you a drink just to watch, to see if, no, I'll just serve them. But you wouldn't insult me by refusing now. No insult intended. Like they knew somehow, like they could sense the thirst in me. Not an inch I give. Wrote the girl a birthday card. You know this part. I thought I might earn something. I don't know. Got to where I could almost look in that mirror. Lived like a monk. Came home, slept, got the paper, did the crossword, ate, went to work again. For days. Months. Then this guy comes in a few nights ago. I'd never seen him before. I see a lot of new faces when Christmas starts in the air. He's quiet like some are, but different. Haunted, like. I start talking to him, trying to be a good soul, and I found out he was from the same place. He was in the Pacific. Our ships could have shook each other's. And he was in town for some a funeral or some such, and we get to talking about things, the equipment and all, because the people aren't what you have in common. It's the layout you recognize, and the terms nobody else knows. It's when you do talk people, it's by function. Oh yeah, so and so, he did this and that. We're speaking the same language. So we talk. And it's not that it was a wonderful time in our lives or anything. It's just you laugh because you were both there. And you were both young. Like high school or something. So we did. We took turns, telling stories about things we haven't seen and whatever, using words we haven't spoken since then. The terms. And then the stories start to go another way. And we're not laughing anymore. Even before I realize it, I'm telling them about something I never said out loud. About that third straight day when the planes wouldn't stop coming. Hours. My hands numb from the vibration of the rounds. And them not stopping. Just swooping in. Me praying for a bullet to sneak through. They were trained for that, to come in low. How could I How could any... It was a commitment I couldn't match. See? Because I wanted to live. I wanted to live. And there was this little hole, this little window. You didn't even see the result. You just listened, like reading every third word of a book. There's just no context. It was no way to explain to yourself. For 3 days. So, the third day, it was this young fellow whose job it was to reload, and he was falling behind. He was green. So I just stopped. I watched from the little window. Everything became quiet, almost peaceful. A cinema with no sound. Soundless fury. I don't know how long I was like that. Then the young fella finishes up his loading and he yells, "Go!" Except I didn't really hear him. I just knew that was what he was supposed to say. And he's staring at me, and I'm just studying his face. Barely a whisker on him after 3 days. A real kid. And the face starts screaming, but I'm not hearing. Just sitting on a fresh round, watching. And then the young fellow looks scared. I mean, more scared than he'd been through the whole thing, and he runs off. And I'm glad because I get to watch through the little window again. Look at all the colors. I don't know how long I was like that either. I feel my shirt being pulled, and there's my petty officer barking something or other, and he turns me like, so I'm facing him, and he looks at me hard. I feel it in the back of my head. And then I'm being led away, down to a lower deck, and I'm thinking they're taking me to the brig. I guess I'd started thinking a little by then. But it was the sick bay. I remember thinking, what am I doing here? There's nothing wrong with me. But I couldn't, tell anyone. Because all I could do was watch. And next thing I remember, I was at the VA hospital back in the States. And there's guys there missing parts of their... And every time I see them, I don't belong here. I'm able-bodied. Except now it's been weeks since I've spoken a word. And I feel like I'm being irresponsible. Me, who raised my brothers and sisters, my mother was off. You know that story. And I kept telling the doctor, I want to go back. At least I thought I told him. My lips wouldn't work with my mind, see? The fella at the bar, he was a good guy. He shook my hand and all, and went off to his funeral. But there was a difference now, you see. Because he stayed and fought, and it was probably all in my mind. Either way, I felt it. And the vultures of the bar had overheard, and they were all like, oh, Well, they had their ammo now. See, they never told us that before. Tell us again about such and such and this and that, and let's drink to the war hero. And me, you know, I'm feeling it all. And sure, why not? That one I'll take you up on. And already, you're slipping.
I had a chance to talk to Brian about this monologue. Here's our conversation. Brian, thank you so much for talking to me today. To start off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Brian Petty. My writing name is Brian C. Petty, so it's hard to forget. I've been writing for the stage since 1996 was my first play, so probably 25 years or so. I've been lucky enough to have a couple of plays published, gotten some productions in New York, California, and one out in Ireland. So kind of, I guess I would describe myself as a mid-career playwright who is still working at it.
The production that was staged in Ireland, it actually has a special connection to Ireland, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's called Echoes of Ireland, and it's a series of 4 monologues that trace a single family from just after the Irish famine to New York City in the early 2000s. And a lot of the inspiration for that came from my family, from my Irish side of my family, the Sullivans. And they were from County Cork. And I had the privilege to have the play picked up by a theater in County Cork, and they've performed it 3 times now. Wish I were there, but not being there, it's probably one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me.
That's fantastic. What was the first play you ever wrote?
First play was called Everything's Coming Up Roses, and it took place on an AIDS ward. And it's actually very much on my mind these days because it was... It came out of an Arts for AIDS benefit where I had written a couple of monologues for it, and I had performed a scene from The Normal Heart by Larry Kramer, who just passed away yesterday or the day before, and he had a profound impact on me, especially early in my career, in writing about that subject and thinking about that subject, to be frank, and so it's been very much at the forefront of my mind with his passing.
Why did you want to be a writer?
I always wanted to be a writer. I don't know where it came from. It never was about stage writing. Stage writing came to me later after I'd been through college. I had done creative writing. I'd done short stories and things like that, and journalism. And when I started acting, actually, it kind of brought me into the world of theater, and I found that I had a particular voice in that type of writing that I didn't have in other places. And it's been since that time, since my first play, and it's been a part of my career.
So let's talk about this monologue a little bit. Obviously, you wrote this monologue as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the play that it's from?
It's called On the Expectation of White Christmases, and it's part of a bigger work. It's the premise is that there's an 11-year-old girl who is waiting to be reunited with her estranged father after 7 years, and it's on Christmas Eve. And there's a lot of family dynamics. There's her mother who has not had a relationship with him. Her grandmother, who is not Jack, the character in the monologue, is not her favorite person in the world. It's very Irish American. It's got a lot of humor in it, believe it or not, for the situation. And Jack's character actually doesn't come into play until the second act, when he shows up in the middle of the night.
When did you write the play?
I wrote this play as a Christmas gift for my late wife, Mary Ellen. So I know exactly when it was written. It was written leading up to Christmas 1999.
Oh, wow.
And I furiously wrote. It's the best deadline I ever had, because I couldn't give myself a day off. I needed to get that finished. I needed to be what I wanted it to be so I could hand it to her on Christmas morning, and that's what I did. And it's only had one production, and that was one where Mary Ellen was able to be in the play. It was up in Greene County when we lived upstate for a while. And that is something I'm very, very proud of, that we got that show on its feet. And I'm hoping, we had plans to do it locally in December, but things being as they are, we're not quite sure whether that's going to happen or not.
Yeah, yeah. So the character of Jack, who's the character in the monologue, there's a lot going on. Even in the short time of the monologue, there's really a lot to dig into with this character. Just to kind of start off, was there any direct inspiration for the character that you can think of from your own life?
Well, this event, the entire play was based on a story from Mary Ellen's childhood. So I took liberties with many of the characters, including Jack. But Jack was based loosely on Mary Ellen's father, Eugene Neligar, who was very much a part of our life when Mary Ellen and I were together, and was a huge influence on Mary Ellen as she grew up. What happened in the play happened in real life. He was estranged from her for 7 years because he had an alcohol problem that he was trying to keep from her, and he had to work his way back into her life. So this monologue happens on the first few steps of that event, of trying and failing to get back in his daughter's good graces.
That's beautiful. In writing this monologue, did you learn anything about veterans or the veteran experience that you didn't know before?
That's a good question, and I know I was very aware of the veteran homelessness issue. I went to New York University, and it was a huge problem back in the late 80s. I mean, you couldn't walk to class without passing people on the street who were, most of them, holding up signs saying that they had served. So I know it was something that I was very aware of before this. What I was trying to do, I guess, with this monologue was to make it very personal and to tell the story that way. I think that I've seen some things recently with the police brutality issue that's just been going on in the news of black men going on and just telling their likes and dislikes, trying to humanize themselves in people's eyes. And I completely get that. I understand for marginalized people that making themselves particular is part of making themselves human to other people. And I think that's what I was trying to do with this monologue, is to not take the weight of veteran alcoholism, veteran substance abuse, and make it a political rant. I was trying to make it very particular to one person, so that through that maybe you can see a broader picture, and at the same time have that experience of this character in this moment telling you where he came from and what his story is.
That's incredibly valuable. Some of these large-scale social problems that we face, especially affecting some segments of society more than others, we tend to think of them in a large scale and not on an individual person-by-person basis as much.
Well, it's harder to ignore if you think of individual people, and I think ignoring the issue is part of the problem. I think nobody wants to talk about mental health. They want to talk about good soldiers, the soldiers that were patriotic, the soldiers that gave their lives, the soldiers that served with dignity, and that is great. Those people deserve that praise. But there's another side to that story, and I think it's easier not to acknowledge that. A lot of soldiers today who are having these problems are minority soldiers. And that's another stigma, you know, another group that is very often marginalized and not given the humanity it deserves. It's very easy to walk past those people. And I think that's part of the issue. I think that's part of the nation's issue with this problem.
You brought up a whole bunch of stuff that I'm really glad you mentioned because I want to get into all of it. I saw a comic on social media today, 2 panels, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and the Tomb of the Known Soldier. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier with wreaths laid over it and flags and people coming to thank the unknown soldier for his service, and the known soldier on the street with a sign saying, "I'm homeless and impoverished, please help," and people walking right past. We celebrate our veterans, at least in theory, but there are so many problems they face when they return home, and you know, we don't often do enough to help them re-enter civilian life. They have economic problems, they have social problems, they have mental health problems, as you mentioned. The economic problem. Yes.
And it's all related. It's all related. You know, I mean, you don't live through some of the things that these guys and girls have lived through, and come away unscathed. And when you get into these economic issues, a lot of times it's driven by the substance abuse problems, which is driven by issues like PTSD and mental health. And it's a snowball effect. And it's, like I said, it's so easy to pigeonhole people, say, well, he's a drug addict, or he's a drunk, or he's one of those homeless people that we don't want to look at. And when you break it down and you see what caused these things and where they came from, it's a lot harder to look away. And I think that's the problem. I think that in a broad stroke picture of what's going on, I think there's a lot of toxic masculinity. I think there's a lot of shame involved in admitting that people have problems, and that and people afraid to ask for help. And it's a bad combination. And these people deserve the benefit of the doubt, and they deserve the help. If you're going to hold them aloft on a couple of days of the year, then you have to pick them up on the other days when they need a hand. I think that's. I don't think we should be arguing about that as Americans, but somehow we do.
There's a lot of things we argue about that seem like they should just be givens. So let's take the character of Jack from this monologue, and he's the face, he's the known soldier. He could be a stand-in for any number of real veterans. He's come back from his service. He is starting over in society. He needs to readjust to civilian life. What happens to him between then and when we meet him in the monologue?
Well, a lot of pain, I think. Part of what these guys, and this was a World War II veteran that we're talking about in the monologue, but it's just as it can apply to Vietnam veterans, the Desert Storm veterans. You see and experience things that you can't completely handle in the moment, because of age and because of development and because of a million factors. And it's easy to see if someone has lost an arm. It's easy to see if someone is blind. It's not easy to see the scars that are left from witnessing atrocities and the horrors of any war, even the limited scope wars that we have now. As far as manpower, as far as people actually fighting hand to hand. It's still there, and it doesn't go away because we can't see it.
Yeah, and that's a very important point. You can see a missing limb. You can see a battle injury. You cannot see the psychological issues. So I've been reading about this a little bit today. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say I think with Jack's character, and I don't know if this. I guess this is coming after that people have seen the monologue, but I think shame is a huge driving force of his, and uh, feeling like it shouldn't have that it shouldn't have been you, who survived somehow.
Yeah.
If I could get the term of what I'm talking about.
Survivor's guilt, I think.
Survivor's guilt, yeah. And he has a tremendous guilt that he's carrying with him because of how his experience of the war ended and what he owed and what he felt he didn't give. And those things don't go away, and they eat at you, and you find ways to try to make them go away. And I think that's what he did. I think that's what the intervening time was for him. And for my father-in-law, he was a very young soldier, and this was 25, 30 years after he had served that he was still having these issues. And he didn't quit drinking until about that time. He was in his early 50s when he had his last drink, and he reinvented himself, and he lived into his 80s and was able to reclaim his life. That doesn't happen to everybody. And I guess at that moment, he was in that pivotal moment where it could go either way. I'm sorry, I cut you off. You were talking about.
One of the really interesting things in the monologue that I found was that some of his guilt seems to stem from wanting to live in that moment as well. And he's talking to a veteran who didn't get sent home, who stayed and fought, and he feels maybe not as worthy of something, of the title or something, and because he wanted to live, which is pretty. I mean, that wanting to live is a pretty basic human instinct. I mean,
yeah. In the course of the monologue, he's it's being put up against the Japanese planes that are swooping in and crashing and giving up their lives. And his line in the monologue that I can't match that. I can't match that because surviving is too important. I don't want to be fodder. I don't want to be. I want to do my job. I want to do my duty, but I don't want to throw my life away. Mm-hmm. And that's a very, very hard moment to come up against at a very young age in a person's life, to be forced with that decision. And the decision ends up being taken away from him because he just can't go on, and that is, who you can say a million things for why that is. Either his mind wouldn't let him or his survival instinct took over. But it leaves a lot in its wake, I think, for this particular character.
We're touching a little on PTSD, and you mentioned that your father-in-law was still thinking about this stuff 30 years later, 40 years later, which is something that I think is true of a lot of veterans, that 50 years after their service, they're still dealing with some of the traumas, and it is fairly well established, I think, by now, that the healthcare services provided to veterans are not serving mental health issues as well as they should be, or sometimes not at all. This is according to the National Academy of Sciences. A large number of veterans don't receive any treatment following diagnoses of PTSD, depression, or substance abuse disorders. And so this is not even factoring in undiagnosed issues. These people have received diagnoses and then no treatment. And you mentioned
again, it's a marginalization. It's a non-acknowledgement that these issues are real. Mm-hmm. And I hate to get back to it, but we have a society that still has a stigma attached to mental health issues, and the stigma has changed. It used to be that, oh, you just didn't look in that direction, okay, but now the stigma is, depression doesn't exist. Depression is something that weak people feel, and it's a made up thing, and it's the snowflakes and all that again, machismo stuff. And these guys come from and girls come from a very macho world of the military, and I think that expectation is something that they live with, and it's drilled into them that you buck it up and you go on and you don't complain. And, you think you have it bad, this guy didn't make it. You think you have it bad, this guy's in a wheelchair. And it adds up to a lot of guilt about being ill. And that's not where we need to be. And, the fact that we are not acknowledging it as a country, as a political unit, it just underlines it for them. You're like, okay, maybe this is not real. Maybe I should be stronger. Maybe it's just my own weakness, instead of reaching out like we should. It should be easier for somebody who is in that situation than anybody to find the help that they need. And unfortunately, that's not the reality.
And the stakes are very high for this too. I mean, it is literally life or death. The Veterans Association estimated veteran deaths by suicide in 2014 at 20 per day. And in 2019, they estimated the suicide rate to be 1.5 times that of non-veterans. And one of the biggest causes, this is according to the Cleveland Clinic Journal of Medicine, is that veterans are less likely to seek help from a mental health professional. So, I mean, how do we destigmatize? How do we destigmatize that for them? Solve it right now on this Zoom meeting.
Yeah, well, I saw that question, and oh man, I if I had that answer, I think it is not a silver bullet answer, and I think what it starts with is naming it, and bringing it to light, and unearthing it, and destigmatizing it. And I'm not a political activist like Larry Kramer was. I'm a playwright, and my part of it is to shine a light, and to make it personal and make it real for people, so that they leave and don't think about the necessarily the bigger issue, but think about one person's experience and how does that translate to other people. But there is a political element to this that Larry Kramer was great at, and that was stand on a soapbox and you scream until people notice you, and you make yourself heard, and you make it uncomfortable for people to ignore it. And it worked, and it can work again. It's hard to do. We want to be polite, and we want to get things done in a way that makes us comfortable. And sometimes being uncomfortable and doing uncomfortable things and being loud and being obnoxious is more of a we'll get more things done than being demure and quiet. I don't know if that's an answer, but I know that it does need to be talked about, and it needs to have a spotlight shown on it.
Is there anything you'd say to your father-in-law today, if you could?
I got a chance to know my father-in-law very well. My father-in-law was not comfortable talking about his experiences. In fact, the things that I learned that I used were very few and far between, and not said to me. They were said to Mary Ellen. The things I got to tell him while he was alive was that I respected him and that I admired him. And I think that respect and admiration is something that is hard to come by for some of these people who are actively homeless, drug issues, alcohol issues. They don't feel that about themselves. It's easy, saying thank you for your service is great, but if the person on the other end of it doesn't feel that and it can't accept that gratitude because they hate themselves, it doesn't do what you wanted it to do. So I was lucky. I got a chance to tell him those things. But there's plenty of other people who need to hear it, I guess.
Yeah. And being willing and able to seek help is only half of the equation. Having the resources to get that help is the other half. There are some resources out there. Are there any that you can tell us about?
Sure. And, I'll completely understanding that we talked about this before, and this is something that's important to both of us, and we want people to have these. So thank you for your help, Ed, for putting some of these. And One of them is mentalhealth.va.gov, and the phone number for them is 877-WAR-VETS. It's 877-927-8387.
And this is
Another one is
this is a 24/7 War Vet call center, confidential. You can call and talk about your military experiences or readjustment any time of the day or night.
the other one was Veterans Crisis Line, which is 1-800-273-8255. The one that I have given to for years, and it was very important to Mary Ellen as well, is Disabled Veterans of America, who work with any type of disability, and try to lend support to those folks who are the most needy of the veterans.
I'll add that for the Veterans Crisis Line, you can also text or anonymously online chat 24 hours a day for all of their services as well. And mentalhealth.va.gov also has a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week national call center for homeless vets, and that number is 1-877-424-3838. Brian, thank you so much for talking to me today, and thank you for the monologue. I think it's very, very beautiful, very moving, and obviously this is the first episode of this endeavor that we've put together, and I think we couldn't have started off on a stronger and more important note. Thank
you for inviting me. Thank you to June and the people at Safe Harbors for everything that they do, and how they're dealing with some of these issues that were brought up. I think they're good people there.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Safe Harbors of the Hudson and the Ritz Theater in Newburgh, New York, doing fantastic work. Please check out all of their social media and websites. Without them, we wouldn't be doing this right now. So can you tell us about any upcoming projects or where we can find more information on all things Brian Petty?
Sure. Well, I just actually ended a project last weekend. My play Echoes of Ireland, which we had talked about, was done virtually by a theater in Queens called Headwall Theater Company, and we did that as a benefit for them. Theater has taken such a beating these days, and we were trying to help them out and do our part for them. So that just passed. I'm always writing. I'm working on another play. And like I mentioned, this play that the monologue is from is hopefully going to be done in December. If things work out, if things are available to us, and that's going to be by a company called Just Off Broadway in Washingtonville. If you want to see more about me, my website is bcpkid.wixsite, WIXSITE.com/Petty Plays, PETTIPLAYS.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Act and React is a Find Your Light production brought to you by Safe Harbors of the Hudson in Newburgh, New York. Safe Harbors' mission is to transform lives and build community through housing and the arts. Supporters of Safe Harbors play a vital role in providing housing for our neighbors and bringing accessible and affordable world-class visual and performing arts to our community. To be a part of this momentum and make a meaningful impact on the Newburgh community, please visit safe-harbors.org to make a secure donation or volunteer to help. Thank you again. See you next week on Act and React.